So we just read The King of the Golden Mountain by the Grimm's brothers, and we'll give a summary of it and then kind of talk about it. So there was a certain merchant who had two children, a boy and a girl, and they were both young and could not walk. And the merchant had two richly laden ships that sailed forth with all his property, and he was expecting to get a lot by his investment, but instead he became a poor man, and he lost everything, and he was left with nothing but one field outside the town. So, in order to get rid of his misfortune, he went out to this field. And as he was walking back and forwards in it, a little black mannequin stood suddenly by his side and asked him why he was so sad. And uh, the merchant asked him for some help if he told him. And the black dwarf says, "Yes, who knows? Maybe I can help you." And uh, he says, and they basically make a deal. If you will promise to give me the first thing that rubs itself against your leg when you are at home again, bring it here to this place in 12 years' time, you will have as much money as you will. So the merchant thought, that must be talking about my dog. He kind of didn't forgot about his son, and he gave the man a written and sealed promise and went home. So when he reached home, his little boy was so delighted uh, that he tottered up to him and seized him by the legs. And the father was shocked, uh, but he couldn't do anything about it. And since he saw no money in his chest, he thought maybe this whole thing had been a joke. And so, but a month afterwards, he goes up to his attic and he finds a heap of money lying there, and he's made happy again, and he becomes a greater merchant than before. But as the 12th year approaches, he gets more and more anxious, and the boy can tell that his father feels this way, but father won't share with him what's going on. But finally, he tells him, and the boy says that, um, well, don't be uneasy. All will go well. The black man has no power over me. So the son had himself blessed by the priest, and when the time came, they went together, and the son made a circle and placed himself inside it with his father. Then the dwarf came and said to the old man, "Have you brought with you what you have promised me?" And he was silent, but the son said, "What do you want here?" Then the dwarf said, "I have to speak to your father, not with you." The son replied, "You have betrayed and misled my father. Give back the writing." Uh, and the dwarf says, "No, I will not give up my rights." And they spoke together for a long time, but at last they agreed that the son, since he did not belong to Satan and he was not did not belong to his father, should seat himself in a small boat, and he should lie on the water which was flowing away from them, and the father should push it off with his own foot, and then the son should remain given up to the water. So that happened, and the boat capsized, and the father went away thinking his son was lost forever and mourned him. The boat, however, did not sink, and it quietly floated away, and it went for a long time until it went to an unknown shore. And when he landed, the son saw a beautiful castle, and he went to it. But when he entered, he could tell it was bewitched. Every room was empty except for the last one, where there was a snake coiled in a ring. And the snake was an enchanted maiden who told him, "Oh, my deliverer, have you come? I've been waiting 12 years for you. The kingdom is bewitched, and you must set it free." And he asked how he could do that. And she said, "That night, 12 black men will come covered with chains, who will ask what you are doing here. Keep silent, give them no answer, and let them do what they will with you. They'll torment you, beat you, stab you, let everything pass. At 12 o'clock, they must go away again. On the second and third night, this will also happen, except 12 more will come. And on the third night, there'll be more, and they'll cut off your head. But if you have not spoken at all and endured everything, you will be released, and I will come with the water of life and rub it on you, and you'll come back to life again and be healthy. And then he said, "So yeah, I'll set you free." And everything happened as she had said. And then he endured everything without saying anything. And so they got married. He became king of the Golden Mountain, and they lived very happily together for a while. The queen bore him a fine boy. And when 8 years had passed, the king thought of his father, and he wanted to go see him. The queen, but however, would not let him go away and said, "I know beforehand it will cause my unhappiness." But he suffered her to have no rest until she consented. At their parting, she gave him a wishing ring and said, "Take this ring and put it on your finger, and you will immediately be transported wherever you would be. Only you must promise me not to use it in me in wishing me away from this place and with your father." So that he promised. He put on the ring. He wished himself to the outside the town where his father lived. The sentries would not let him in because of how rich and strange he was dressed. And so he went to a hill where he exchanged clothing, uh, and he put on his old shepherd's coat, and then he entered the town without hindrance. Then he came to his father, but his parents did not recognize him. Uh, and then he said, "Do you know of a way you could recognize me?" And they said, "Well, our son had a raspberry mark under his right arm." And so he showed them that, and then they admitted that he must be their son. Then said the father, and then he told them about his story about being king of the Golden Mountain, and the father would not believe him. Uh, because he's dressed in a shepherd's ragged coat, and the son got angry, and he forgot about his promise, and so he wished his wife and his child to him, and breaking the promise. And the queen, she wept and reproached him for doing that. So then he led her out of town into the field and showed her the stream where the little boat had been pushed off. And then he said, "I am tired. Sit down, and I will sleep while I am on your lap." And while he was asleep, she left and took the ring with her and wished herself back to the kingdom. So when he awoke, um, his wife and child were gone, of course, and the slipper that she was wearing was still there as a token. And home to your parents you cannot return, thought he. They would say that you are a wizard. So you must be off and walk until you arrive in your own kingdom. So he went away and came at length to a hill by which three giants were standing, disputing with each other because they did not know how to divide their father's property. When they saw him passing by, they called to him and said little men had quick wits, and that he was to divide their inheritance for them. The inheritance, however, consisted of a sword, which, if you took it in your hands and said, "All heads off but mine," every head would lie on the ground. And secondly, there was a cloak, which made anyone who put it on invisible. And third, there was a pair of boots, which could transport the wearer to any place he wished in a moment. He said, "Give me three things that I may see if they are still in good condition." So they kind of negotiate with him a little bit too, but he's eventually able to put on the cloak and abscond with all the items. Um, so he got uh the boots to what were the boots for? Just
Mm,
make you go very swiftly. So the boots take you anywhere you wish. So they gave him the boots, and now so he absconded with all the things. Um, and when he was near his palace, he heard shouts of joy, and it turns out his wife is getting remarried, and he fell into a rage and felt betrayed. So he put on his cloak and went into the palace. When he entered the dining hall, a great table was spread with delicious food, and the guests were eating and drinking and laughing and jesting. She sat on a royal seat, and he placed himself behind her so that he ate all her food and drank all her wine so that she couldn't get anything. And she was dismayed and ashamed. She arose and went to her chamber and wept, but he followed her there, and he said, Has the devil she said, Has the devil power over me, or did my deliverer never come? And then he struck her in the face and said, Did your deliverer never come? It is he who has you in his power, you traitor. Have I deserved this from you? And then he made himself visible, went into the hall and cried, The wedding is at an end, the true king has returned. And so all the kings and princes and counselors were assembled there, and they ridiculed and mocked him, but did not trouble to answer them, and said, Will you go away or not? At this they tried to seize him, and he drew his sword and said, All heads off but mine. And all the heads rolled on the ground, and he alone was master, and once more king of the Golden Mountain. Yeah, so that was King of the Golden Mountain. We talked about how this story is a little bit about maybe isolation. It's certainly about revenge and resentment. But what did you think about this one?
mm. Yeah, I was thinking initially more about isolation and just kind of families kind of being separated and kind of isolation stemming from that.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that
so
happens
like,
from the very beginning.
yeah, it's like from the beginning, the father is trying to find a solution for all the wealth that got stolen. So he leaves his family and he's at a field or something, and that's when the mannequin comes,
Yeah,
and he makes the deal with the mannequin, and then the isolation happens again when the son is uh pushed out to sea and is alone on the boat once after the 12 years. Um,
yeah,
and it happens a third time when the queen takes their child away and goes back to the kingdom, um, after he broke the promise about not using the ring to transport her and the son with him.
yeah,
So yeah, just families are divided, and I think in the isolation, there's just kind of darker things kind of brewing in the characters over time, maybe. But
yeah,
that's just my kind of ideas.
yeah, which makes sense. There's also a lot of time and distance that happens in the
Mhm.
story, which also kind of maybe facilitates kind of brooding.
Mhm.
And certainly the passions do come out later on, like with the when the king of the Golden Mountain, after he has become king, and seemingly it's almost the end of the story, or it's the end of it could be the end of a story where he has suffered in silence, and then he became king, and he has a good marriage. He's 8 years passes, uh but then he yearns again to see his parents, his father specifically, the story mentions, and he goes back this long distance, which seemingly is kind of a magical distance, right? Because he goes over this river by himself, and when he comes back, he's dressed really strangely, as if he's been in some kind of magical land or some, something that's very, very foreign to the centuries of the city of his father's house. But anyway, yeah, my point is there's lots of distances traveled in time and space, and that can kind of facilitate, yeah, emotions building up, or there seems to be something of the logic to of that in this story.
Yeah. And like it needs them to make decisions to where they don't understand the consequences and but they end up having to sacrifice their family in some kind of way.
Yeah,
Since they
right.
don't seem they seem overtaken by passions, like you said, and they don't consider uh, that the things they're agreeing to could come at a heavy price for their
Yeah,
families.
right. Exactly. That happens the first time and later on with the merchant. And it may
Mm,
be befitting that the story starts off with a merchant who is a person who invests and risks a huge amount in loading up a ship with goods and having it sent off and not knowing if you'll ever get anything back from that.
mm,
That may be the kind of the theme of this is like the anxiety of sending a whole shipload of stuff off the because of the risk that you're taking and the uncertainty involved in the enterprise.
mm,
And yeah, later the son he does ascend from where the father was because he's a king of the golden mountain. So in a way he's like the king of the gold, king of all the money in some way. And so but he later on, yeah, he doesn't know what he's risking even with a single ring, right?
mm,
Kind of he has a negotiation with his wife. His wife tells him the terms. So this story very much is about kind of business, like
mm,
because the remember the father had negotiated with the dwarf, and then the son takes over and he negotiates for a long time with the dwarf. And then later on the wife tells him that gives him a ring, but she tells him the terms of that contract, so to speak, which
mhm,
it also resembles like a marriage in that he has a ring, but it's interesting that he cannot take her. The one stipulation in the contract is that he cannot take her. He cannot wish her back to his father's house. So that again emphasizes the idea that the Golden Mountain is this otherworldly place. You cannot the the crossing between his world with his father and the Golden Mountain is very limited. The
mm,
princess is not supposed to cross over. Only he can go back and only after a long time.
mm.
And then they don't recognize him.
Yeah. And it kind of like it's also kind of saying that his family can never really be complete or united, really,
Yeah, because they don't
because
recognize him.
they don't recognize him, and then his wife doesn't want to be kind of brought to the family either.
Right. Yeah.
So he's kind of just divided uh, all the time in some way.
Yeah. And is that division, that lack of wholeness, maybe something to do with the subjects of the story being money and power, right? Like his father wanted money and the son wants power. And
Uh-huh.
both of them get it, but at what cost? Obviously, as you're talking about cost of their family, cost of harmony. Yeah. Yeah. What did you think about his development over time? Like at the beginning of the story, he's loving his father, but then that, enacts the sort of curse part of the contract that he has made with the magical mannequin.
Mm,
And then later on he shows himself to be kind of trying to save his father or to save them, and he has this magical circle around them, he and his father,
Mm,
which again emphasizes that he wants the wholeness, he wants the completeness of family. And then, anyway, to do that, he tries to negotiate with the dwarf, and he's able to kind of use his power of reason to get himself out of belonging to the dwarf. And then
mm,
later, he's able to suffer a lot to save the princess that has, been waiting for him for 12 years as a snake, and he becomes king of the mountain. But then he's drawn back home, and there after that, that's when his darker passions show, right? Like he's angry that his father won't acknowledge him as a king, and then that leads him to break his promise, or ruin his kind of agreement with his wife, and that leads to their marriage being broken, and she leaves with his son.
mm.
Yeah, what did you think about his development there?
Yeah, I thought it was just, yeah, he's kind of going from a heroic and kind of self-sacrificing child, but then because of his dad's decisions, he kind of becomes like his dad again, but a worse version, probably even. And that he just rolls everyone's heads at the end of the story. Uh, and and he's like completely alone. Well, it says he's alone on that mountain, but we don't know about the ending exactly.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think the wife
but
is still there, but his
yeah,
marriage is kind of ruined, right? He's hit her.
yeah,
He's furious at her for betraying him.
yeah.
He is still, she may be alive, but he's still alone.
Mhm. Yeah, so he just becomes a very kind of bitter, angry kind of person.
Yeah.
And like I said, I feel like he's just repeating his father's mistakes, but on a grander scale, even.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, it seemed like his ascendancy and literal ascendancy too in the story to the Golden Mountain. He was ascendant in that story until then, but then he wanted to go back, and then he could not resist, bragging, or it was his ego. He could go back home, he could be, he could have the trappings of humility by dressing in his old shepherd's clothes. But when his parents do not believe him that he has become the king of the Golden Mountain, like he has to prove it to them, you know?
Hmm.
And that's, yeah, and then yeah, it's like this thing is about negotiation, is about promises, which is what negotiations are about. And once he messes up on that, everything goes bad.
Hmm.
You know, he tries to take his wife back. He does take his wife back to the place where he first departed from his father, that boat on the shores of the great river. And then, yeah, he falls asleep, and then she leaves him. Yeah. And yeah, isn't this story all about like promises and whether you keep or break them, what you do with your word? I think even the fact it's even significant that earlier in the story when he has to save the princess who is in snake form in the empty enchanted castle, by the way, it's empty, but then once he breaks the enchantment, it fills up with people, presumably as it was before the enchantment of not only her, but of the whole castle. But anyway, to break her snake enchantment, and snakes, symbolize, among other things, transformation, right? And, you know, um, something about hidden and revealed things. But, um, and power, obviously. And so anyway, yeah, to break the her enchantment, he has to endure a lot of suffering without saying anything. So again, it's about his word. Yeah, the story is kind of about integrity, right? Because later on, he condemns her for betraying him. Although, does he make a mention of the fact that he broke his promise? I mean, he
Yeah,
messed up.
it's like I wondered if she really betrayed him, but then again, like I guess the princess and the mannequin are kind of the same in that they didn't really lie about regarding like the enchantments and things, uh, but there was still like something explain it, but they didn't really lie, but
They
mm,
didn't lie, but then the people still hated them.
yeah. So I don't know if they were still tricksters really, but I think it was kind of a bad sign when the princess was in the form of a snake originally. It was kind of foreshadowing things.
Hmm.
Uh, but
Foreshadowing what? Just tragedy?
tragedy or that maybe things with her wouldn't go well in the end.
Yeah. I mean, she has this presentiment that things are going to go badly with him when he asks to go back. I think that's the
Mhm.
problem. Yeah, I know, but the queen, however, would not let him go away and said, I know beforehand that it will cause my unhappiness. But he suffered her to have no rest until she consented. This was a character trait. This persistence in asking was a character trait that he showed earlier with his father, where he asked his father repeatedly to tell him about the deal with the mannequin.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mentioned to you that this is very much like another story from another author, another collector, Franz Xavier von Schoenwerth, in the collection The Turnip Princess and Other Tales, other newly discovered tales. Um, and that story is called The Iron Shoes. Now, in that story, there's some differences, but it's in the main the same story, except that it turns out very differently. At the end, when the Iron Shoes prince goes to the wedding, he hits the bridegroom and messes, and he knocks down the parson's book so that he stops the wedding ceremony. And then when they end up and then they go and just, okay, we'll just have the banquet without like getting married, you know. And then he goes and sits with the beggars, and he keeps grabbing food off the plates of to and feeds the beggars, and then he eventually like loses his ring, I think. But anyway, uh he he has a different personality in that story. He doesn't have pride. He lowers himself. But in that story, he's not king of the Golden Mountain. He's just the king of that like hidden castle,
Mhm.
in that other sort of realm too, just like the Golden Mountain. But Yeah, he's not so ambitious in that one. And in that story, he is the son of a gardener, not the son of a merchant. Yeah, but there's so many other similarities in that. Also in the Iron Shoe story, the title comes from the fact that when his wife leaves him, she leaves a pair of iron shoes and she says, even if you walked in these 1,000 miles or until they're worn down or something, you will never find me. But, you can view that as like a challenge. If you walk, so many miles or whatever, maybe you'll have paid your penance. That's kind of what I thought of it as. But in this story, yeah, he doesn't quite have that kind of penance either. So it's like he doesn't have the redemption. Yeah, he becomes the bad version of himself in the story we're reading, the King of the Golden Mountain. And in the
Mm.
Iron Shoes, he is redeemed by maybe, his his trial, his 1,000 miles that he walks in the iron shoes. And after he walks so many miles in those shoes, he meets those beings on the top of the mountain and he outsmarts them and gets the things. And then he could go really, really fast. So yeah, I've never quite seen these kind of huge amount of parallels between two stories, but have it turn out so differently. But yeah, they do start out differently too.
Mm.
Yeah. And in the Iron Shoes, there's no mannequin that comes there. It's just that actually his father kicks him out of the house, and then so he wanders around, and then he finds this enchanted castle. And the princess is not in a snake form, but she only comes at night or something like that.
Yeah.
But then there are the men who like physically abuse him, beat him, and he has to take it without a word 3 nights in a row. But of course, fairy tales, it's always three. And and then they marry, and he's king of that castle, and then he wants to go back. And yeah, he doesn't get recognized, and he also has some envy or jealousy because the 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 noblemen of that of his father's estate, where his father's a gardener, they're having this they have this ball, uh and he has to brag to them that my wife's better looking than all you guys' wives, and they're like, prove it, and then that's why he brings his wife over. So he's still you see there's the same emotions. He needs to prove he's not recognized. He needs to prove himself. He has that ego. But in the Iron Shoes, he eats his humble pie by wearing the iron shoes. And later on, again, he's humble, sitting with the lowest of society and also feeding them. And eventually he feeds them, and his ring falls off, and his ring, I think, was the sign of his former identity as like the not quite ready to be good king version of himself. And then he's able to remarry the prince and kind of, go on with his life. In a way, I like that story better, but of course, that
Mm.
story he turns out to be a hero. This story he turns out to be a villain. Yeah, I've never quite. I mean, we're reading more and more of these stories. Maybe we'll see more and more of these variations,
Mm.
but that's pretty interesting to see. Yeah. So you saying they have a lot of water in this story?
Yeah. Just like with the stream, the water of life, and the ocean.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
water is
like
typically a boundary. It's symbolizes kind of, it can be emotions, renewal, obviously with the water of
mm,
life. She brings him back to life.
mm,
I mean, maybe he thinks but any more? Is there more that you want to say about the water of life, the water here in this story?
Mm. Oh yeah, obviously there's the sea, and that's kind of like a isolated and kind of lonely place. Um, a lot of which kind of happened to him in the story, but I also thinking just water is just kind of symbolizing the transformation and renewal and maybe becoming a new person. But it seems each time water is mentioned, it's kind of like of as he's developing into a kind of worse version of himself.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
there are chapter markers in his life,
yeah,
and even before his life, his father's life, because his father
yeah.
first sends off ships and then loses his fortune that way.
Hmm.
But yeah, we usually don't read stories. There are other stories with villains or people who end up villainous at the end, but we usually don't read those, and there aren't that many of them. They usually end up with some kind of good and happy ending. But this
Hmm.
story, yeah, it's kind of a villainous ending, him seizing power and hitting his wife and kind of, putting her away in a room and then killing all the princes and all the nobles around, gathered around, and kind of, seemingly being a person motivated by, bitter revenge and injustice at a feeling of betrayal after he kind of broke his word. Maybe that's at the core of the story is like both his father and he pay a price for going against the natural order. I mean, his father is, trying to become rich and raise himself way above his station. I mean, maybe in these folk tales you're not supposed to do that or something. You're supposed to be
Hmm.
humble. But and then yeah, the son also causes a lot of destruction by becoming king of the mountain and trying to stay there. But still, I feel like we haven't explored some things about his transformation. He wouldn't have been bad off if he hadn't have gone back home and then been unrecognized by his father. That
Hmm.
seems key here. His father doesn't believe him, but does he have reason to not believe him? They don't believe him based on the way he looks, you know,
Hmm.
not on the way anything about him. Is there anything in the story earlier that he indicates he shouldn't be believed? Wasn't he a good boy
Hmm.
before he left for home?
Yeah, yeah.
Wasn't he bravely facing up to his father's um having kind of condemned him to some kind of slavery with a magical dwarf? I mean,
I just kind of thought of it as the son kind of looked up to his father and defended him. And when they came to confront the mannequin over turning him over, and of course he sacrificed himself, but when he comes back years later, uh, disguised as a beggar, the father kind of looks down on him and kind of doesn't have faith in him and what he's saying
yeah,
about his identity. So it felt like a betrayal to him, I imagine.
yeah. And then he later, yes, and he's so angry at his wife's betrayal too, what he
Hmm.
sees as his wife's betrayal.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the beginning of the story, like the son doesn't seem to harbor anger towards his father regarding the deal.
Yeah,
He doesn't really say anything about it, like how could he have done this, which would have been reasonable to
yeah,
do. He just he just doesn't seem to be so fixated on that. He seems to still have faith in his dad.
Yeah, and just trying to problem solve, and he's kind of
Hmm.
using religion to kind of protect them. So that's showing a faith
Hmm.
in God, faith in the institutions of his
Hmm.
time, faith in the world.
Hmm.
And he's
Yeah.
confident he's able to negotiate with the dwarf for a long time and able to kind of save himself.
Hmm.
But then, yeah, later on, he wants to get acknowledged for how well he's done. Like I mean, he came back from the dead. I mean, he's got a lot to be proud of. Yeah, and he went from, being surely dead to, being king of the Golden Mountain and having a son and everything. But maybe there's something about how he goes back home when he's not recognized by the sentries because of his strange clothing. And then he disguises himself in his previous garb. There's something about him just not accepting, maybe, that he has changed, not accepting that his whole world has changed. I wonder if there's almost this feeling that he's actually dead. Maybe he really did die and he went to the other world. He
Hmm.
really crossed the river Styx or some river like that. He married a snake and now he's not supposed to come back to the regular world. And when he does come back, and there are other stories like this where a man marries a mermaid or something like that, a magical being, but he cannot do certain things, and he has to accept that this is his life, and if he wishes to go back in some way, and he has that human longing for his old family or something like that, then that's when the spell is broken. So that may be what's going on in this story. And, just like with his father's will, or especially his sort of force of will and talent, he is able to make it work in the end, but only by kind of killing everybody with this magic sword that he connived out of three giants' hands. Maybe that's why he becomes a villain. He's kind of, yeah, he's all about violating the order of things.
Hmm.
That seems to be something about how the soul of this story, and the the contrast of that story with, I mean, this story with von Schoenworth's The Iron Shoes. Yeah, that other one seems to take a more, uh, he has more of a religious kind of feel where he does a long penance and he lowers himself and he gives alms, and he kind of, yeah, regains what he lost. Whereas in this story, he literally regains, it's almost like a sneering title, the King of the Golden Mountain. I don't know if there's an emptiness to it, but there's a sadness to it, and yeah, he's literally the king of the Golden Mountain, but he's the king of nothing anymore.
Hmm.
And then he reproduces the conditions that he encountered and from which he saved the princess, right? Because
Hmm.
she is now sort of put away in a chamber with a husband that kind of hates her and feels like she betrayed him, full of bitterness, anger, now a murderer. And he has just the the palace was rejoicing at a new king ascending, and other people gathered there, and he kills them all. So now it's kind of like the princess is trapped again, and there are no people anymore in the castle. So he's reproduced the conditions he found her in when he first
Mhm.
came there. So yeah, interesting story. But I feel like there's more depths, but yeah, maybe we'll kind of plumb those a little bit later.
Mhm.
Okay, well, sounds good. Thank you for reading the story with me.
Okay.